It was a terrible fight, hand to hand, building to building and staircase to staircase. You demolished a wall just to find a moor in front of you. The first to open fire was the one who would save himself. We were really scared. We've lost more than 1/3 of our troops during those combats. Good morning, I'm Pep and this is the Spanish Civil War. In this channel and for the next 3 years we will follow week by week the Spanish Civil War, its battles and the holocaust that it provoked. Last week we've seen how inside the battle for Madrid, the battle for the university city carried on, claiming the lives of hundreds of people. Among them, the revered anarchist Buenaventura Durruti that was wounded the 19th near the Hospital Clínico and died the next day. We've talked also about the international recognition of the Burgos Government by fascist Italy and Nazi Germany that planted the seed for Franco's international legitimation. We've mentioned also how the 22nd, after 2 weeks of battle, the Nationalist forces resumed their attack in order to break, again, the Loyalist defenses and finally reach the heart of the city. That same day, they've almost made it. According to Rojo and Miaja's biographer, at one point the general found himself pistol in hand after his car was struck by an air raid trying to regroup a band of routing militiamen 50 meters away from the enemy. But the enemy was stopped. As the verses that became popular during that time pointed out, the coffee got cold and he could not enter in Madrid. Maybe you remember back at the end of October Mola's declarations about taking a coffee in the Gran Via de Madrid in a week's time. It did not happen. The city resisted at a huge price, and the fighting those last days in the university city was vicious. We started our episode with a quote from Theo Francoist from the 11th International Brigade about the fight in the university city. But at the end, the fight was over, or at least the nationalist offensive and trenches and dugouts will be built along the line. The 23rd, in a meeting between the Nationalist High Command at Leganés, Franco, Mola, Varela and Saliquer decide to stop the frontal assault against Madrid. The battle for Madrid is over. Thomas suggests 10,000 casualties in each side during the battle. Sdale, following Bandet, talks about 8,500 for the Loyalist forces and 3,000 for the Francoists. The battle for Madrid has ended. The siege of Madrid starts. Pain and misery are not over for the capital. By the end of the battle, for every third attacker, there are 3 defenders. Franco has underestimated the Republican resilience, their capability to fight inside the city, and to learn about their previous defeats, winning in confidence and discipline. Franco has not been able to capture Madrid because he didn't have the numbers to capture such a big city. In order to win, he needed to rout the enemy. This did not happen. We have to talk again about the deliberate mistake, using Franco's words, of diverting the nationalist troops towards Toledo in order to relieve the Alcázar back in September. Had he rushed towards Madrid earlier, there's little doubt that the city may have fallen. Keep in mind, the nationalists lost almost 1 month that was used by the Loyalist forces to reinforce themselves and equip with the recently Russian material. Even though the fall of Madrid in Francoist hands in late 1936 wouldn't have meant a Republican defeat, the government went to Valencia in order to continue the fight from there, as they were sure about the fall of the capital, so an early seizure of the capital would not have meant a swift end to the war. With the beginning of the siege of Madrid, each side starts to dig in. We've already talked about the Dana that brought rain last week, and that means mud. To make matters worse, and as Stark would say, winter is coming, and peasants, industrial workers, carpenters, teachers from all over Spain, but also from all over the world, will find themselves entrenched in the cold fields and hills of Spain, just to die in the cold and the mud. The 24th of November, one day after the Nationalists decided to stop the frontal attack against the capital, an uncoordinated Republican attack tries to capture Talavera, defended just by 300 militiamen. With the help of deviation, the attack is easily repelled, but it highlights to the Nationalist High Command what they already know, that their front is precarious, far from continuous, and threatened by the Republican forces on their flanks. Their position beyond the Manzanares, their spearhead, is even worse, just a few hundred meters wide in some points, almost surrounded by the enemy and with a small, thin umbilical cord that could be subject to enemy fire. With this situation in mind, the 29th Francoist forces launched an attack with the aim of securing their thin corridor inside the city, the Pozuelo offensive, also known as the first battle for the A Coruña road, starts, and with it we enter another phase of the Spanish Civil War. We've talked about the War of Columns, when hastily assembled militia columns just after the coup poured all over Spain. We've covered the approach and battle for Madrid, and now we will enter into the winter battles, where the recently created Popular Republican Army will face the Nationalist army in the cold Castilian winter, but also in other places of the Iberian Peninsula, as we will see during the next weeks. The Pozuelo offensive, as said, is not pointed to capture Madrid, but to secure the precarious nationalist flank, and maybe, just maybe, if we put a bit of fantasy and hope, it can become the starting point for a wider operation to envelop the city. The offensive is also, after the unpleasant experience in urban warfare, a way to go back again towards the wars in the open, the war of movement, where the regulares will be able to outmaneuver the Republican defenses and gain easy victories, like during the first stage of the war. They advanced the 29th in 3 columns under Varela's general command, a strong mixed column with infantry, tanks and artillery under Sir Alonso, even though weakened by the previous fight, will march north towards Pozuelo, protected by a cavalry column under Gavilan. Meanwhile, the also weakened Barron will try to pin the enemy reserve, attacking again through the Casa de Campo. The combined strength of the columns reached 7,000 men. The same 29th, the first Nationalist cavalry arrives at Pozuelo, where they expect the Republicans to fly, fearing an encirclement. During the first moments, some confusion is present on the ranks of the still under formation 3rd Mixed Brigade under José María Galán, but soon they overcome the confusion and realize that shooting at mounted men is easy. As the day rolls on, Francoist infantry arrives, as well as the artillery, outnumbering now the 3,200 men of the Mixed Brigade. The Nationalist attacking forces have also an abysmal artillery superiority, with 44 pieces against 2. But it seems they are not able to pierce the defenses of the 3rd Mixed Brigade. Republican troops are not flying but fighting, dying but holding their ground. Even though, as these Catholic nationalists started their offensive on Sunday, we'll have to wait until next week to see how it progresses, to see if the 3rd Mixed Brigade will be able to hold the punch of the Francoist columns, or if it will shatter. We are going to take a brief look now at the international stage, because this week we have many important things ongoing. Some of them we left in suspense in our previous episode. We've talked, for example, in our previous episode about an order given by the British Admiralty that proclaimed that any British ship could be assailed and checked by the Francoist Navy. This week, Eden reacts to this Admiralty order and cancels it, not allowing it to reach the public. Let's take a second think about that. Not long ago, Eden was pointing the finger at the USSR for its intervention, but stayed blind to Germany and Italy's involvement. We've seen how since the beginning of the war, the United Kingdom has been doing what their politicians thought was better for British interests. Considering the amount of investments UK enterprises and particulars had in Spain, they simply considered that Franco and the military was more likely to protect their interests than the legitimate government of Spain that crumbled after the coup. We even saw how, during the first crucial moments of the coup, the British soldiers in Gibraltar helped their rebel Spanish counterparts, and we've seen, also, the role of the shameful non-intervention committee. But from now on, progressively, even though a bit late, and without any positive effect for the Republic, the UK government and also its military will start to realize that maybe, just maybe, Franco's victory would be worse for British interest. But this victory, with the defeat in the Battle of Madrid, seems now farther away than it was a couple of weeks ago. So by the 28th of November, even if not very happy with it, Franco allows the creation of a full Italian blackshirt division that will be sent from Italy to Spain. Last week we also mentioned that from that moment we would start referring to the faction that rebelled against the legitimate government of Spain as Francoists or Nationalists instead as rebels, as we had been doing up to that moment. We made this change because Italy and Germany recognized Franco's Burgos Government as the legitimate government of Spain. Well, this week, in reaction, German and Italian ambassadors will be expelled from loyalist-controlled territory, and the embassies and consulates in Madrid and Barcelona will be closed. Well, we've talked about what happened during this week in the battlefields of Spain and what is going on in the international stage. Before leaving the international stage, we will link it to what happens in the rearguard, where the massacres take place and where the word innocence is meaningless. And we'll do so because the 24th of November, Bishop of Vitoria, Mateo Mujica, has a meeting with the Pope, Pius XII, where he protels the murders carried on by Francoist forces of Basque priests. He has a list with 14 names of priests murdered by fellow Catholics. According to Thomas, the Pope will write to Franco asking him to prevent this from continuing. We talked already in a couple of episodes about the massacre of Paracuellos that started at the beginning of November and will end at the beginning of December. Today we'll close the chapter as the 24th, 25, 26, 27, 28 and 29 new sagas take place again. To talk about the Paracuellos massacre and close the chapter, we'll follow Preston's The Spanish Holocaust, and we'll have to go back to the beginning of November with the nationalist forces at the gates of the capital. Back then, the 7th of November, in a meeting between the unified socialist youth that were in charge of the public order and the CNT that controlled the roads towards the capital, it was decided that the prisoners held in the capital would be divided in three categories. First, fascist and dangerous elements that were meant to be executed as soon as possible. Second, supporters of the coup that were too old or with professions that made them not dangerous for the Republic. They were to be evacuated to Chinchilla. And third, the least politically committed that would be released with guarantees in order to improve the Republic's international image. Even if the first saga had already happened by the time the agreement between socialists and anarchists took place, the meeting ensured that from now on there won't be any problem with anarchist road controls. So even if Carrillo said that the prisoner convoys were hijacked by the anarchists, this seems far from reality, even though probably the anarchists took part in the killings. According to Preston, already by the 8th there was no more space for corpses in Paracuellos, so 400 prisoners were taken to a disused irrigation channel near Torrejón de Ardoz to be killed there. Most of the death of these first 2 days came from the Modelo prison that was very close to the front line. During the rest of the month, the sagas will take place in other prisons like San Antón, Porlier or Ventas. According to a post-war testimony, behind the massacres we could find Segundo Serrano Poncela, the Junta's public order delegate. He was supervised by members of this public order delegation, and the killings were carried out by agents of the General Directorate for Security. Poncela will remain in his post until this week, until the 27th of November, when his disagreements with Carrillo favored his resignation. After the war, Carrillo and Poncela will try to blame each other for the massacres. Also this week, the anarchist minister García Oliver will start pulling the strings in order to make Melchor Rodríguez, the man that managed to prevent some massacres during a week back in November, as delegate for prisons in Madrid. We've said that some sagas will take place also at the beginning of December, and sagas will continue to happen in some precise moments through the war. But the episode that started with more than 900 prisoners executed in 2 days was nearly over. Up to 3,000 prisoners will have been killed by the 4th of December. Again, the single and most important institutionalized massacre carried on by the loyalist authorities. With the Paracuellos massacre, we get closer to the end of the week, that we will finish with a note about Emilio Kleber or Luther Stern, or Luther Manfred Stern, or Manfred Stern, or Moshe Stern, whatever. We've mentioned last week the fact that Kleber, in command of the 1st International Brigade at the beginning of November, was being revered as the savior of Madrid. He even got a promotion, and that fact pissed off Miaja, Rojo and others. Kleber will have also difficulties with André Martí, political commissar of the brigades and secretary of the Comintern, a powerful enemy. With all those enemies, this week, according to Tremlett, Clever will be sent to an inconspicuous advisory job in the Mediterranean coast. Lukács, commander of the 12th International Brigade and not a friend of Clever, will later say that Clever was mistreated. With this hero falling in disgrace, we end the week. Please don't forget to like the video and subscribe. If you enjoyed it, share it. We have to bring light to the history of Spain. If you're able to support us in our Patreon channel, as these heroes already did, or offer us a coffee, this would also be great and would help us to carry on and improve the project. Let's make this possible all together. Thanks for your attention, goodbye, and salute.